So we're gonna do a little bit of IEW. I created a little PowerPoint just so I can keep my notes straight. And then I can send this PowerPoint to both of you when we're done, so you have it later to look at as well.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Just so it's not super detailed, because I talk a lot, but it is going to have all your main points on it that you will need. All right. So
Awesome.
let's
Sounds good.
go into present mode. So we're going to start out with basically like what you'll need, because it's pretty easy. You'll need the teacher's manual version of the IEW. So make sure that you always have the teacher's manual version and they don't order you the wrong one. So I have a few different ones here. So I have this one, which is US history. And then I have a bunch of them. I have fables, myths, and fairy tales. I have medieval history, and I have geography. So there's a whole bunch of different types of IEW. So it's really good to make sure your student will at least connect to it in some way, shape, or form. And there's also a whole bunch of different levels, which is what I'll get into later. And usually the level that Jess or whoever's doing the intake gives you is pretty spot on to what the child needs. Just make sure that level meets up with the child. Also have some sort of PDF scanner on your phone. I find that the easiest to copy the pages and put them online. So I use something called Genius Scan, which I just take a picture and it automatically turns it into a PDF document. But that is definitely the easiest way to do it rather than scanning on your printer or whatever you have. I just use a PDF scanner. And then every time you have a new student, you'll be given a student resource packet. So it's a PDF document. Some of them are like 150 pages long. And this is where you'll have all of your information, like how to create the outlines, how to do all the different pieces of it, and it'll make more sense later. But always make sure that you're able to download that student resource packet. And you can either send that whole packet to your student up front, like over the Google Classroom, or sometimes I just give them pages at a time, not to overwhelm them. Really depend on your student in that aspect, because as T probably knows, there's some students that can handle the whole packet at once, and then there's some that can only handle like 2 pages. And if there's more than that, they freak out. So just like really figure out your student. And then I use Google Docs to edit so that both myself and the student can edit at the same time. So that's all that is.
Would Word be okay?
What?
Would Word be okay?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yep. So I use either Google Docs or Word, actually switch back and forth. And so IEW is all about structure and style. That is the 2 main portions of it. And it's kind of split into structure and style. So structure, think about how a building is made. You have to start at the bottom and go to the top, right? If you start at the top floor and try to work backwards, it's not really going to work out that well. And whereas style is like how you dress, how you wear. So in all of the books that I have, I'm just going to look at medieval history because it's one right in front of me. The first lesson talks about structure and style. So these books are really helpful, the teacher's manual, because it really helps you able to describe what you're trying to tell your student. I always change the wording because it's a little proper, but I always start with talking about structure and style. Structure is how we create the thing. Style is how we make it our own. So structure is usually always going to stay the same between different students, but style is really what's going to make everyone different. So that's the difference between those. All right. So the first thing you're going to want to look at is showing your student symbols and abbreviation. So I always have my students create or think up as many symbols and abbreviations they can for words. So when they're creating their outlines, instead of writing the word number, I'd have them write a pound sign or hashtag. Equal or is, I would always have them use an equal sign. It's just so that they have less writing to do, and the less writing they do, the less likely they're going to plagiarize on accident. So if they can really change their outlines into abbreviations or pictures, it's really helpful. And you'll see what that looks like in the next coming slides. So I always give them this sheet, this symbols and abbreviation sheet at the very beginning. And you can find this in the student resource packet. It'll be at the end in one of the appendixes. And so I always give them this sheet up front, and I have them oftentimes print it out and have it next to them just so that they can look at it while they're creating their outlines. But I also have them add a section of their own pictures. So maybe they decide they're doing the fairy tale book. So there's a lot of crowns or kings or queens. I'll have them make a crown to mean king or queen or something like that. So it is a little bit different and more tailored to themselves. And I encourage as many pictures as possible. And you'll see some crazy ones that students have done later on, because I did a bunch of examples. Some are the book's examples, some are my students' examples, and some are ones that I've done. So we have a whole mixture in here. But that is the number one thing I do in the first lesson as I talk about symbols and abbreviations. And so this is what we're creating, is keyword outlines. So this is an example of a source that will be given in one of the books. So this one's taken from the medieval history book. So it's about the Middle Ages. So in this first type of outline, this is going to be for your Unit 1 and Unit 2 outlines. So there's 9 units in total. And no matter what level they have, either young elementary, middle, or high school, they all start out with Unit 1 and 2. So what that is they choose 3 words from each sentence to write their keyword outline. So I'll show you, for example, this first line here. So I chose Middle Ages, which I just abbreviated to MA, began, I kept that word whole, Western Roman Empire, I abbreviated, and then I did 5th century as well. You try to limit the words per line as 3 words or less, but you can have as many abbreviations or pictures as you want. So for Unit 1, they are not writing anything. They're only creating an outline. Unit 2 is where they're going to take that outline and put it into their own writing, their own words. So it's very much a read and write situation. So almost seems like it's copying, but it's getting the student used to picking out the most important words from each sentence. So if they use a lot of the same words at this point, don't worry about that, because that'll start to change later on. So this first section is labeled I, because it's going to be your topic sentence, and then each sentence from there on. So there's 9 sentences in this, so I have 9 lines over here. Does that make sense? And in your student resource notebook, there will be blank ones of these that they can fill out. Or I have them created into a Google Doc, or I also have ones with a Word doc so that I don't have to have them try to type in a PDF. Some students don't like to figure out how to type into a PDF. So I've created some of these on my own as well. So this is like the books example, but I'll show you one that one of my kids, I'll come back to this one. So this is what one of my students looks like. It was from the 2nd unit where they went on and wrote their story. So they went through and circled 3 words from each line, being the most important words from that section, from that sentence. And they went ahead and put it into their keyword outline. This student chose to draw a lot of pictures. They like drawing pictures. They like being able to pull out the pen and draw, especially the younger ones. And so for the words paused, moment, look, they did pause, moment, look, but with an I for the word look. They just wanted to write the word and draw the picture. They drew a picture for a dock. They drew the men and women, the fish, the cat, the dog, the water, all of those different things, a house or shed. And so they were able to kind of make it their own at this point. So before they go on to writing that rough draft, I actually will cover up the original story, just like blanking it out like that. And I'll have them retell just by using the words they chose here, retell the whole story. So if they're able to retell that whole story just from their keyword outline, then they know that there's enough information there. They have all those important pieces, and it makes it a lot easier for them to go and write that rough draft at that point. They feel a little bit more confident, because a lot of times when kids go to write it for the first time, they go, oh, I can't write that, or I don't know what I'm supposed to say. And I'm like, well, you just told me what you were going to say 3 minutes ago. And so it allows them to at least get a little bit of an introduction about what they're going to write. So I have them rewrite it into their rough draft. And then I copy and paste it for their final draft so that they have somewhere to edit. I always like to leave their rough draft exactly how they write it so they can see how it may change from the final draft to the rough draft. Because as it goes on, their rough draft and final drafts are going to look completely different. Especially in that unit 5, unit 6, unit 7. They're not even the same story at sometimes. So that's always what I like to do. And this is what it would look like in unit 1 or unit 2. If we go back, it's kind of the same idea as I said. So I have the student retell the story out loud. I don't have the student focus on any dress ups or anything that's style wise when they're writing that rough draft, because that's the stuff we're going to do in our final paper. And then I type it on Google Docs. You also use Word so both can edit. And then I never edit the rough draft. I copy and paste it and leave it just how it is. Even if there's misspelled words or anything like that, I just leave that exactly how it is. All right, so unit 3 gets a little bit different. So as you can see, the stories are a lot longer. So this is taken from the US history version. It's a Native American myth. And so this time they're not taking 3 words from each sentence. They're actually organizing their information into an outline. So this first paragraph is all going to be about characters, setting, background. So you put all that information there. These are the questions I always ask my student when writing that setting, characters, and background. What's the setting? Describe it. Who are the characters? Tell me about it. And I tell them that it should be dripping with description in this first paragraph. I want it to sound overdone, because we can always rein it in really easily, but it's harder to get things out of them usually. So if you can overdo your description at the beginning, that's what you want to do. So we work on that characters and setting, and then we work on the conflict and the plot. So a lot of times students, especially the younger ones, have trouble identifying what the plot or the conflict of the story is. So to get them to try and figure it out, I ask them, what makes the story, this is not on here, but what makes the story interesting? Because if I were to tell a story without a plot or conflict, it would be like, I went to the park, I had fun, I went home. It's not interesting, right? But if I said, I went to the park, I fell down and broke my arm, my leg, and my foot, now we have an interesting story, right? So what made the story interesting can often help point them to what the plot is. And I try to keep it as simple as I can in my examples. And so I help them figure out what the plot is. And then I ask them, well, what does that character do? What do they say? What do they think? What do they feel? And if it's not in the story, I want them to kind of come up with what they think the character would say, feel, think, or do at this point, just to see if they can really read in between the lines of what that story is trying to say. Because pretty soon they're going to have to come up with that all on their own. And then we go to the climax and resolution. So this is what leads to the conflict being solved, what caused the problem to be solved, and what happened because of that result. This is where we also talk about theme and like a moral of a story, because oftentimes that's what that resolution is all going to be about. Why was this story written? What makes it important? Because if there's no reason to why the story is written, why do we need to hear it? Type of thing. So that's what I have them focus on for that last paragraph. It just makes it a little bit easier for them to understand how these stories are all fitting together. So from this point, they would write the this in those same paragraph. They would write the characters and setting and background all in the first paragraph. They'd write the conflict all in the second paragraph and write the climax resolution all in the third paragraph. And same like before, I have them tell it out loud first before they type. And it seems to work really, really well. I just go paragraph by paragraph. And when we go to edit these ones, again, we copy and paste it into the final draft, but I don't have them connect the paragraphs until the final draft. So sometimes it'll be a little redundant because they'll repeat the same thing in the first paragraph as the second paragraph. But when we go to edit, that's when all of that will be adjusted. Yeah. So that's unit 3. And then we have unit 4. Sometimes the stories get shorter in some of the sections. Sometimes they're longer. So this one is taken from the Fairy Tales and Myths book. It's about Neverland. So in this one, you're summarizing what's happening. You're not taking the settings, the conflict, or anything like that. You're picking the 5 or 6 most important things from the story. So in this sense, I just have them check off what sentence or what piece of information they find the most important. I don't know why my background just disappeared. But it's fine. Sometimes someone logs on because it's the info one and it just disappears. That's just my TV. All right. So they pick all their different important parts and I have them put in the outline. Again, about 3 words per line. This student decided to use emojis, which again, I encourage. If they want to, they can go right ahead. Because a lot of times they may be on an iPad or a phone, or they might have emojis on their computer. And I let them be free with how they want to do it. It's their outline. And then this would be their final draft. They took those words. I didn't include the rough draft in this one, but they just put them all together and put those pieces and they get their final draft. You'll notice that we have certain things underlined, which I'll get to that point later on. Yeah, so that's unit 4, just summarizing what they read. Unit 5, there is nothing to read. Nothing to read whatsoever. They have to come up with their story on their own. So this is a different picture to the final draft because I didn't have both of them. So all they're given is pictures. They may be a story that they've already known, like this one is Peter Pan. But they have to come up with all of those pieces of information themselves. So they have to come up with what's happening in that picture. But these are the questions you want to ask them to get them thinking. Who's in the picture? What are they doing? Where are they? How are they acting? Why are they there? When is it happening? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? What are they doing? What are they saying? What happened before? What happened after? Is it outside, inside? What happened? What's the description of everything that's happening? And this is where you can really let them be creative. Because if let's say they didn't know that was Peter Pan, okay? They can name whatever the characters they wanted to. So let's say they wanted to name them John, Billy, Joe, and Sam. that is totally fine. Because all they have is a picture. Picture tells 1,000 words, right? So they can choose whatever those words are going to be. And that is totally fine. With these keyword outlines, your central fact, your main idea is what you can actually see in the picture. So in this one, they flew towards the star. They went to Neverland, right? In this picture, what's happening? There's Captain Hook and a frightened Wendy who was a prisoner, right? And then in the last one, you can see that Wendy is telling a story. And so that's what your central fact is. And everything else below it is just those questions that are answered over here. This is a really, really creative way of writing. And you'll always get the most interesting stories with the picture. My favorite ones. And so this was a final draft of the Ugly Duckling story. So it's just pictures of the ugly duckling. And it's pretty funny. My favorite story, which I couldn't find, I hoped to would, was one of my Peter Pan stories from one of my students from about a year ago. Every character was changed. The whole storyline was completely different. Captain Hook was good. Peter Pan was bad. Because can't really tell from the pictures. And it was very funny. But they turn out pretty interesting, pretty hilarious. So, yeah. So the next type of outline is called a fused outline. So this is your research papers. You'll have multiple different sources of text, and you want them to write this kind of outline, the summarizing the reference for each of their different pieces. So for this one, there was only 2 sources, one about Pegasus and one about the Griffin. This was from Myths, the Myths one. And so I had my student write their outline about Pegasus. She wrote her outline about the Griffin. And then we took those 2 outlines and created them into one. So she decided that in her fused outline, she was going to compare the Pegasus and the Griffin. Another way she could have gone was talking about their similarities, but she only went with their differences, and that is totally fine. They can choose whatever direction they want to go. It's left pretty open, and IEW is left pretty open to how the student wants to take their story. So on her final draft, that's exactly what she did. She started off with Pegasus and went into the Griffin, talking about the Griffin and how they were different from each other. There are some pieces in Unit 6 where there may be 3, 4, or 5 different sources before fusing them together. But you'd still do that same thing, create a small outline for each of the different stories and then fuse them into one. I always say outline should never have more than 7 lines in them if possible, because per paragraph, because otherwise your paragraphs get too long and gets a little jumbled up and confusing. But yeah, so now we're going to get into Unit 7. So Unit 7, they get to come up with their own story. They have a very loose prompt that they have to do. So this one was in geography. This was from the geography book. I'm trying to remember all of them. And this was to describe a location and something that happened in it. It could be anything. So they chose a storm that they had at a hotel in Atlanta. And that was their story. And but they could have chose anything. This was one where I taught a class, so I had multiple students in this one. So another student chose whale watching on a boat, and another student chose a beach vacation. But they were completely different from each other. So in this one, they just want to write. Their outline is just their body paragraphs. So notice how there's 5 paragraphs in here. There's only 3 pieces on the outline. because that's the main thing that happened. In that first paragraph, they put how they got there, why they're there, background information, who's in the story. And then their last paragraph is what happened because of this. So like the after, the introduction and conclusion. And a lot of times in Unit 7, this is where they would write a letter to somebody. So as you can tell, they had dear and love at the end, but they can choose whoever they want to write it to and why. I had one student write about stars because it was with mythology. So she wrote about the myths in the stars, and she wrote it to her dog, and she had different things in the story all relating to her dog, like kind of conversationalist, like do you remember when you went outside to go to the bathroom and looked up at, like next time we'll look up at the stars or stuff like that. And it was pretty funny. But again, you can take any form you want. That's their style. The structure is what we're trying to teach them, how to write it, how to put it together, what the sentences should look like. And all of the underlined pieces are all the things that we make sure are in each of their paragraphs or each of their stories. Most books end at Unit 7. So that would be any of the younger ones. So any of the elementary school, any of the middle school ones, all will end at Unit 7. I actually only have one book that goes past Unit 7, which is the Advanced U.S. History. But otherwise, they end at Unit 7. So Unit 8 is a very formal essay. The outline is very formal. It has you go through the dramatic opener, the background, a thesis statement. It is very specific. It does help them create a great formal essay, though. So the essays they were doing before are very informal. They just took some different pieces and put them together. This is where you're going to really get finding different pieces of information, getting that thesis statement important and in upfront and retelling that thesis statement. The great thing about the formal essay one is that the book has a lot of information on how to do it. So if you're trying to figure out what all these different things mean, the book is very great at explaining how to set this up. And actually the book's pretty good about doing all the sections. But for this one, I always find that is a huge jump from going from a more informal essay to a formal essay. And then, so you won't do this one very often. It will probably take over a year to get there, even if you do have an advanced student, because the books are kind of long. But then the last one is a formal critique. So this is where they would read a section and critique how it was written. So taking the information they know about how to come up with a conflict, how to come up with the climax, all those different things, and critiquing someone else's writing. So they're not doing any writing after this. They are just critiquing in Unit 8. All right, so we're going to get into all those things that I had underlined in all the different stories. So there's 3 different categories, and we're going to go through each of those categories. So the first one are dress ups. So this is what makes your story interesting. It's a lot of the descriptive words. It helps your reader understand and see what you're actually talking about. So the main ones are ly words, so ly adverbs, who, which clauses, strong verbs, quality adjectives, and a www.asia.b clause. I'll explain what that means. So ly adverbs is what I have listed here. So the book will give you kind of a little bit of a description about what an ly adverb is. So this is taken directly from one of the books. So it's basically ly adverbs, any word that ends in ly. So quickly, opulently, ornately, aimlessly, stealthily, like any ly word. There's thousands of them. And in the student resource notebook, there's lists upon lists of them in there as well. So if a student needs help figuring out one. So you'll want to have your student have at least one ly word in each paragraph. So not only do you teach it in specific lessons, there is also review in every single lesson in the book. So in this section, it was look at your keyword outline and choose a phrase from each paragraph in which you can add an LY word. So it helps them figure out what kind of LY words can go in there. The younger level books, so like the early elementary school, don't introduce LY words for like 4 or 5 lessons. Whereas the advanced US history book introduces it in the first lesson. So it really depends on when it's introduced and for when you want your student to start using it. The next one is who, which clauses, which is like the emperor who had many friends threw many parties, right? Or the dog which didn't like his food, pushed it over onto the ground, something like that. So it gives more information about a person, a place, a thing, or idea, a noun. Strong verbs and quality adjectives, something we're going to talk about a little bit later. And then the www.asia.b clause. It's just a clause that begins with when, while, where, as, since, if, although, or because. So that's where we get the www.asia.b. And again, the books tell you exactly how to use them, exactly what they are. Your student reviews them in every section, and there's pages in the student resource notebook about all of those different clauses. And then the next thing is decorations. So again, this is where you're going to be really dripping with description. So decorations really only come in the advanced books. You start to get them in the lower levels, but they're a lot more advanced than the dress ups would be. So this is working with alliterations, similes, putting dialogue or conversation in them, something that catches their eye at the beginning and leaves them wanting more at the end. The 3 SSS means very super short sentences. So 3 super short sentences in a row, like it was dark, the clouds were black, the storm rolled in, like very short sentences to make it kind of dramatic. Decorations are probably one of the most fun things to write. And this is an example of how one would be introduced in the book. So it'll give a description of what it is, some examples, and again, description of what it is, some examples, and then it'll have some pages for your student to practice all those different things. So like I said, they're not very much in the younger books, but the older books they are, and they get introduced pretty soon at the beginning of the book. They get distributed as they go on. All right, so sentence openers. These are in all of the levels. Again, towards the end at the lower levels, towards the beginning at the beginning levels, but it's different way to start different sentences. So subject is what is used most often. So you try to get them away from starting every sentence with the subject. Like, he went to the park, she had fun, the ball was red. It's all starting with a subject. Try to wean them away from doing that, but maybe have them start with a prepositional phrase like on a starry night. So any word that begins with a preposition. Or maybe you begin with an ly adverb. Suddenly, the storm rolled in. Ones that start with an ing. And then like a very casual, like when www.asia.b clauses are very casual. When you see me, say hello, starting with that word when. And then a VSS, which means a very short sentence. I tell them to limit their very short sentences because then they're more dramatic. But you always want to have at least one of all of these types of openers in a 3 or 4 paragraph writing. So at least you're switching it up a little bit. And then here's some more show. I just put an extra one in here to show how some of the sentence openers are introduced. So if you want to look at how that works. Look at that later on. And then, so every book has banned words that a student is not allowed to use when they write with. These are often introduced in the very, very first lesson. Like, you can't use these words, you have to find alternate words for them. Every book is a little bit different. So, like in the advanced US history book, there's going to be more banned words than a lower level book, because they may only have go, went, come, came, said, say as their banned words. But the higher the level, the more banned words they're going to have, just because they're not very descriptive. So, and in the student resource notebook, there is pages about what better words to use other than go, went, other than any of the banned words that are there. And so it's really easy to come up with them. And you can kind of describe it as, like, if I wanted to use the word said, like, the owl said to go home, is not very descriptive on how the owl's acting, right? But if I said the owl whispered to go home, maybe it's a secret. Or the owl yelled from the top of his lungs to go home, again, gives a little bit different way of speaking. So I really have them focus on finding those banned words. I just use the find method on the computer, like searching the paper, and I type in, and then I highlight all of the banned words and have them change it after. But these are some examples. And like I said, with the back here, the strong verbs and quality adjectives, those will be words to use instead of your banned words. So a quality verb for go could have been soared, like if it's flying, it's flying. Or a quality adjective for good would be, depending on what you're talking about, like phenomenal would be better than good, right? So it's an alternate to a banned word. All right, so at the end of each section, at the end of each lesson, there's going to be a checklist that looks like this. Makes it very easy to make sure your student has all their pieces of information in their writing. And I give this to them before they even write their rough draft, so that they have an idea of what I'm looking for. So you can find blank ones in the student resource notebook. They are at the end of every lesson in the teacher's manual as well. So you can get them either way. But it'll go through very specific name and date, double space, centered title, ly adverbs, who, which clause, strong verb, quality adjective, www.asia.b, all of the different ones. And I never really give a point value, but you can. That's a personal choice. I just know some of my students have lower self-esteem, so I don't try to give a point value at all. I just have them fix what they need to. Some of the older students, I say the 15, 16, 17-year-old range, like points because they like to see what they can improve on. So again, kind of go with how you feel your student would react. But yes, so I always go through the composition checklist with the student after their final draft is done. So vocab, every lesson has vocab lists. And every book's vocab list is different. Every type is different. They will be listed at the beginning of every lesson, and they will also be listed at the end of every book in the back. And I don't focus too much on vocab. There is review pages and everything for vocab. But it's just, I like to make sure that they know how to use it. They can use it in a sentence. They put one vocab word in each story. It doesn't have to be the vocab from that week. I just let them choose words that they find the most interesting. Sometimes they have a hard time fitting that specific vocab word into a story. But yeah, so I don't stress it that much, but I do go over it and make sure they know what each of them are. And I keep a running list going And if there's one that they really have never heard before, I'll bring that up a few different times just so that they can know how to use that word properly. So some of the books have additional literature that they can read. I know geography, you have to use the additional literature because that's where the source comes from. And so I have all of those books too. And some of them, the additional literature is not needed. And then like advanced US history, there is additional literature and it is helpful, but not necessary. So depending on level of student, how great of a reader they are, because sometimes that can really throw them off if there's a ton of reading they have to do at home. I would kind of tailor that to your student. But when you get sent the student resource packet, they'll also send some of the additional literature pieces. Sometimes they're only 1-page stories, so they'll send all of those as well. So I have a copy of those at home. And sometimes when I did this as a class and when I was in person mostly, I did this as kind of like a read aloud type story. So students that didn't have much trouble reading, I'd have them read it. I just give it to them, have them read it aloud, practice talking out loud. For students that have a little bit more trouble reading, I would give it to them ahead of time so that they could practice reading it themselves and speaking it out loud before they had to do it in front of somebody else, because sometimes that can be pretty scary. Yeah, so this would be put in an example of what a lesson would look like, exactly how the book shows it. So this was Unit 4, Lesson 5 from the US History book. So it goes through, like, there's games in the book too, so you can always play those as well. And you have what that section is going to be about. So this is summarizing a reference, so it tells how to do that. It gives some of the lessons. So this lesson is learning about sentences and clinchers and how to make them interesting. And then it talks about how to make a 3-paragraph model. And then this is all of the quote unquote assignments for that lesson. So they split it up into day 1 versus day 2 through 4. It might be day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. But I don't always follow this. I kind of go with how fast the student works. So the student works pretty quickly, I might be able to get a whole lesson done in an hour. If the student is slower, it might take 2 weeks to get a lesson done, and depending on how often they have it as well. But it's very descriptive on how to do it. And again, it'll have that additional literature down here. And then normally the vocab would be about right here on day 1, but there's no new vocab on this lesson, but that's where it would be. And like it said, there's vocabulary quizzes. I don't give them, but that's a choice that you can make yourself. All right. And so this was an example of the reading that they had to do for this lesson. It's about 1.5 pages long. Some students like to read out loud. Some students like to read to themselves. Some students have more trouble reading than writing, so they ask me to read it, and I'm okay with any version of that. And then this is what a keyword outline would look like from that source text, putting it into words. And then this is what a final draft would look like. I have all of those dress ups underlined. I have the vocab words bolded. So I'm going to use quite a bit. And here is that checklist for this lesson. So they needed an ly word, a who which clause, a strong verb, a quality adjective, a www.h.b clause, and they wanted 1 for each paragraph. And then they needed an alliteration, a simile or metaphor, and personification, all in that paper as well. So the checklist does explicitly say exactly what's needed, which is nice. And so I'm going to ask if you have questions, go ahead and ask them. But I was also going to show you what that student resource notebook looked like if you wanted to see it.
I have a lot of questions.
Okay, go for it. Let me hear
Okay.
it.
All right. So the number one is for the teacher's manuals. Are those, where do we get those? Are those being
So
sent to
Jess will
us? Do we
send
look?
them, Jess will send them to you.
Okay.
And
Cool.
she might ask you, like if it's a student you already have, because I have some students that did Barton for a while and then asked writing. And so I would talk to them about all the different types of books that they could do, like as a student trying to figure out what lesson they might like.
Okay.
And you can find that on IEW's website. There's a whole list of different types of books that you can use.
Okay. On top of that, for the additional literature, is that something that would be able to find online, or does that come with the book?
So, some of it comes with the book. Some of it doesn't. Some of it doesn't. So if it is a source for the actual writing, it comes with the book.
Okay.
If it is not, I've done it a few different ways. I've asked Jess to buy it for me and she sends it, or I've bought it and Jess has reimbursed me. So I've done it both ways. Cool. Just whatever works out easiest.
Okay. Cool. All right. The other question I had a couple of questions, but so you mentioned like you had a class with multiple students and then you had a class with like one student. So I was wondering, how does that work?
I've had it both ways. I've had multiple students. I've had one student. Multiple students, I do a lot more peer editing. I have them edit each other's papers a lot. And that's my main difference. If I have one student, I do basically most of the editing with the student. Yeah.
Okay. Another question. I'm sorry, I got a lot. Are the sessions like the Barton sessions where it's like 30 minutes or 50 minutes, or what is the, 30
minutes or 50 minutes. I prefer 50 minutes just because you can get more done. But 30 minutes works. I've again done it both ways.
Okay, cool. And then the other question I had, and this is my last question for now, probably, is for the banned words. Like, is there like an online thesaurus? Would that be all right to use? Or
yes, I use online thesaurus all the time.
Okay, cool.
And then also, I'll see if I think I have a student resource book pulled up.
Okay, cool. I had one more question about the banned words real quick. Just if they're in the levels where they're advanced enough to be doing dialogue or something like that, would it be okay for them to use banned words if it fits for the character?
Banned words, that's the one thing. They're allowed to be used in dialogue.
Okay, cool. I was curious about that.
So this student resource notebook, I believe, is the one for US history. Yes, it is right here. And there are 136, this one's 136 pages, and it goes through all of the different units. It'll have your LY words. It'll have the quality adjectives. These are all lists that you can use instead of those words. It goes through all of your different emotion words you could use, all your decorations, grammar rules. If you need to figure something out like that, I also use Grammarly on my computer, which helps a lot. And they're really, really descriptive. So this is like a basic idea of what's going to be used in that book. And then it has banned words right at the beginning. It has a list of prepositions that will be often used, what the clauses all mean. And then this is how all the units are structured. So you have your unit 1 structure, unit 4 and 6 structure, unit 5, 7 and 8. This is the super one, which is a little bit different, same idea. And critiques, and all your vocabs in here as well. There's examples of different writing. There's also examples in the back of all the books too, of each one.
Cool.
And then it goes through all what you could use instead of go and went or come and came. Huge list there. Say or said, get and got. So there's a lot of lists.
And it's not scripted like Barton. at
It's
all,
not
right?
scripted at Barton.
Okay, cool.
I am really bad at keeping on the script.
Same.
I have come up with my own words and
Yep.
I don't even read the book anymore. For Barton, I only use that side piece, the few words. So like,
I've been doing that too. I find that a lot of the Barton script, I'm like, wait a second, this doesn't make sense, or this is kind of confusing. So
yeah. So it's not scripted at
no
all.
worries. Okay, cool.
And it's really nice because it's very systematic. You do one thing and then you add another thing and you add another thing. So if even as the person teaching it, if there's something that you need to work on, there's actually plenty of work there too. I usually, when I first started, it took me about 15 to 20 minutes to set up the first couple lessons because I like to set them up, make sure all the papers are in the right spot, kind of copy everything. But now that I've been doing it for almost 2 years, it takes me about 5 minutes and I can get about 3 lessons done at once.
Cool.
So, but at the beginning, it did take me a while to set things up. But yeah, so there's tons of stuff. There's worksheets in here, ways to practice similes and metaphors, different types of hooks, how they can start different paragraphs. The student resource notebook is something you'll probably use a lot.
So with the practice pages and something, if there's something a student is struggling with, we could just go to the extra practice and kind of...
Exactly, because there's some practice in the book, but then there's more practice back here as well.
Okay, awesome.
Any other questions?
None over here. It looks like the book is going to be helping a lot with any of the questions I kind of had.
Yes, the book is really helpful. I think it's more helpful than Barton. Even though Barton's scripted, I think this has better descriptions, if that makes sense. The descriptions are really good. If you're wondering, my favorite book to do is Fables, Myths, and Fairy Tales. That one's my favorite. That was the one I first started with, and I've done it with like 8 or 9 students because it's just my favorite.
So I had a question about the students too. So for Barton, a lot of the students are like younger. For some reason, I only have like 9 and 13-year-olds. Is this mostly teenagers or is it just...
My youngest was that I've had is 10.
Okay.
And I've had up to like 17. So I've had 10 and 17. So older kids.
Okay.
The younger levels are, I don't even have one that's the little kids, which I consider like the first graders to third graders. I don't have any of those books because I don't really have any of those students. But geography is more middle school, more late elementary school.
Okay.
Fables, Myths, and Fairy Tales, I would say, is true middle school.
Middle school.
Yeah, like your 6th, 7th, 8th. Right?
Yeah.
Medieval history is the same, 6th, 7th, 8th. And then I would say advanced US history is definitely high school.
Okay. Good to know.
And I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, Fables, Myths, and Fairy Tales may also have a little version as well, like a younger kid version.
Okay.
Just don't have it.
Yeah, and then Jess would send that in to us if we happen to have a student that needed it.
She sends it direct. She just buys it directly from IEW.
Oh, cool.
Send it directly to you.
What does IEW stand for? Because I don't actually know.
Institute of Excellence in Writing.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I'm not going to remember that, but good to know.
Institute for Excellence in Writing.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's just a company that decides how to write, basically. And you'll have an online account, which it's just the info made, and you can log in and download as many of the like student resource notebooks that you need, or the additional literature and stuff is would all be in there.
Okay, cool.
I like doing it. It's one of my favorites to do. But yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
It was different at first, but it gets easy pretty fast.
I guess it's just like with Barton, I had to find the rhythm. I assume it's the same with this.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing. You have to find your own rhythm with it. Mhm.
Yeah, yep. So looking forward to that adjustment period.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, we'll just end it here.
Cool.
Alright, perfect timing,
Sounds
got another meeting
good.
right
All right. Sounds good. Well, probably see you both in the future sometime.
now.
Probably, I would assume.
And if you have any questions, you can message me
Trello.
and I'll send this out as well so you can have the
Okay.
point to look at.
Cool. Are you sending it to us through Trello or through the emails?
Probably through email because
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, are you gonna
Cool.
be sending out a recording of this too?
there is a recording. It'll be on, I bet it'll probably be sent out by somebody. I don't know who will send it out, but it will be. Yeah.
Sounds good.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Sounds good.
All right.
You guys have a great day.
All right.
Yeah, it's my birthday today.
Oh, well, happy birthday.
Oh, happy birthday.
Nice. Good day.
Yeah, for sure. All right.
Sure.
Goodbye.
All right. Bye.